Anna Karenina, Part 5. Leo Tolstoy. Chapter 27. The house was big and old-fashioned, and Levin, though he lived alone, had the whole house heated and used. He knew that this was stupid, he knew that it was positively not right, and contrary to his present new plans, but this house was a whole world to Levin. It was the world in which his father and mother had lived and died. They had lived just the life that to Levin seemed the ideal of perfection, and that he had dreamed of beginning with his wife, his family. Levin scarcely remembered his mother. His conception of her was for him a sacred memory, and his future wife was bound to be in his imagination a repetition of that exquisite, holy ideal of a woman that his mother had been. He was so far from conceiving of love for woman apart from marriage that he positively pictured to himself first the family, and only secondarily the woman who would give him a family. His ideas of marriage were, consequently, quite unlike those of the great majority of his acquaintances, for whom getting married was one of the numerous facts of social life. For Levin it was the chief affair of life, on which its whole happiness turned. And now he had to give up that. And when he had gone into the little drawing-room where he always had tea and had settled himself in his armchair with a book, and Agafea Mihalovna had brought him tea, and with her usual, "Well, I'll stay a while, sir," had taken a chair in the window, he felt that, however strange it might be, he had not parted from his daydreams, and that he could not live without them. Whether with her or with another, still it would be. He was reading a book, and thinking of what he was reading, and stopping to listen to Agafea Mihalovna, who gossiped away without flagging, and yet with all that, all sorts of pictures of family life and work in the future rose disconnectedly before his imagination. He felt that in the depth of his soul something had been put in its place, settled down, and laid to rest. He heard Agafea Mihalovna talking of how Prohor had forgotten his duty to God, and with the money Levin had given him to buy a horse, had been drinking without stopping, and had beaten his wife till he'd half killed her. He listened and read his book, and recalled the whole train of ideas suggested by his reading. It was Tyndall's treatise on heat. He recalled his own criticisms of Tyndall, of his complacent satisfaction in the cleverness of his experiments and for his lack of philosophic insight. And suddenly there floated into his mind the joyful thought, "In 2 years' time, I shall have 2 Dutch cows. Pava herself will perhaps still be alive. A dozen young daughters of Berkut, and the 3 others, how lovely." He took up his book again. "Very good. Electricity and heat are the same thing. But is it possible to substitute the one quantity for the other in the equation for the solution of any problem? No. Well, then what of it? The connection between all the forces of nature is felt instinctively. It's particularly nice if Pava's daughter should be a red-spotted cow, and all the herd will take after her, and the other 3 too. Splendid. To go out with my wife and visitors to meet the herd. My wife says, 'Kostya and I looked after that calf like a child.' 'How can it interest you so much?' says a visitor. 'Everything that interests him interests me.' 'But who will she be?' And he remembered what had happened at Moscow. Well, there's nothing to be done. It's not my fault. But now everything shall go on in a new way. It's nonsense to pretend that life won't let one, that the past won't let one. One must struggle to live better, much better." He raised his head and fell to dreaming. Old Laska, who had not yet fully digested her delight at his return and had run out into the yard to bark, came back wagging her tail and crept up to him, bringing in the scent of fresh air, put her head under his hand and whined plaintively, asking to be stroked. "There, who'd have thought it?" said Agafea Mihalovna. "The dog, now. Why, she understands that her master's come home, and that he's low-spirited." Why low-spirited? Do you suppose I don't see it, sir? It's high time I should know the gentry. Why, I've grown up from a little thing with them. It's nothing, sir, so long as there's health and a clear conscience. Levin looked intently at her, surprised at how well she knew his thought. "Shall I fetch you another cup?" said she, and taking his cup, she went out. Laska kept poking her head under his hand. He stroked her, and she promptly curled up at his feet, laying her head on a hind paw. And in token of all now being well and satisfactory, she opened her mouth a little, smacked her lips, and settling her sticky lips more comfortably about her old teeth, she sank into blissful repose. Levin watched all her movements attentively. "That's what I'll do," he said to himself. "That's what I'll do. Nothing's amiss. All's well." Chapter 28. After the ball, early next morning, Anna Arkadyevna sent her husband a telegram that she was leaving Moscow the same day. "No, I must go, I must go." She explained to her sister-in-law the change in her plans, in a tone that suggested that she had to remember so many things that there was no enumerating them. No, it had really better be today. Stepan Arkadyevitch was not dining at home, but he promised to come and see his sister off at 7 o'clock. Kitty, too, did not come, sending a note that she had a headache. Dolly and Anna dined alone with the children and the English governess. Whether it was that the children were fickle or that they had acute senses, and felt that Anna was quite different that day from what she had been when they had taken such a fancy to her, that she was not now interested in them. But they had abruptly dropped their play with their aunt and their love for her, and were quite indifferent that she was going away. Anna was absorbed the whole morning in preparations for her departure. She wrote notes to her Moscow acquaintances, put down her accounts, and packed. Altogether, Dolly fancied she was not in a placid state of mind, but in that worried mood, which Dolly knew well with herself, and which does not come without cause, and for the most part covers dissatisfaction with self. After dinner, Anna went up to her room to dress, and Dolly followed her. "How queer you are today," Dolly said to her. "I? Do you think so? I'm not queer, but I'm nasty. I am like that sometimes. I keep feeling as if I could cry. It's very stupid, but it'll pass off," said Anna quickly, and she bent her flushed face over a tiny bag in which she was packing a nightcap and some cambric handkerchiefs. Her eyes were particularly bright and were continually swimming with tears. "In the same way, I didn't want to leave Petersburg, and now I don't want to go away from here." "You came here and did a good deed," said Dolly, looking intently at her. Anna looked at her with eyes wet with tears. "Don't say that, Dolly. I've done nothing, and could do nothing. I often wonder why people are all in league to spoil me. What have I done, and what could I do? In your heart there was found love enough to forgive. If it had not been for you, God knows what would have happened." "How happy you are, Anna," said Dolly. "Everything is clear and good in your heart." "Every heart has its own skeletons, as the English say." "You have no sort of skeleton, have you? Everything is so clear in you." "I have," said Anna suddenly, and unexpectedly after her tears, a sly, ironical smile curved her lips. "Come, he's amusing anyway, your skeleton, and not depressing," said Dolly, smiling. "No, he's depressing. Do you know why I'm going today instead of tomorrow? It's a confession that weighs on me. I want to make it to you," said Anna, letting herself drop definitely into an armchair and looking straight into Dolly's face. And to her surprise, Dolly saw that Anna was blushing up to her ears, up to the curly black ringlets on her neck. "Yes," Anna went on. "Do you know why Kitty didn't come to dinner? She's jealous of me. I have spoiled. I've been the cause of that ball being a torture to her instead of a pleasure. But truly, truly, it's not my fault, or only my fault a little bit," she said, daintily drawling the words, "a little bit." Oh, how like Steva you said that, said Dolly, laughing. Anna was hurt. Oh no, I'm not Steva, she said, knitting her brows. That's why I'm telling you, just because I could never let myself doubt myself for an instant, said Anna. But at the very moment she was uttering the words, she felt that they were not true. She was not merely doubting herself, she felt emotion at the thought of Vronsky, and was going away sooner than she had meant, simply to avoid meeting him. Yes, Steva told me you danced the mazurka with him, and that he— You can't imagine how absurdly it all came about. I only meant to be matchmaking, and all at once it turned out quite differently. Possibly against my own will. She crimsoned and stopped. Oh, they feel it directly, said Dolly. But I should be in despair if there were anything serious in it on his side, Anna interrupted her, and I am certain it will all be forgotten, and Kitty will leave off hating me. All the same, Anna, to tell you the truth, I'm not very anxious for this marriage for Kitty, and it's better it should come to nothing if he, Vronsky, is capable of falling in love with you in a single day. Oh, heavens, that would be too silly, said Anna, and again a deep flush of pleasure came out on her face when she heard the idea that absorbed her put into words. And so here I am going away, having made an enemy of Kitty, whom I liked so much. Ah, how sweet she is! But you'll make it right, Dolly? Eh? Dolly could scarcely suppress a smile. She loved Anna, but she enjoyed seeing that she too had her weaknesses. An enemy? That can't be. I did so want you all to care for me as I do for you, and now I care for you more than ever, said Anna with tears in her eyes. Ah, how silly I am today. She passed her handkerchief over her face and began dressing. At the very moment of starting, Stepan Arkadyevitch arrived, late, rosy and good-humored, smelling of wine and cigars. Anna's emotionalism infected Dolly, and when she embraced her sister-in-law for the last time, she whispered, "Remember, Anna, what you've done for me, I shall never forget. And remember that I love you, and shall always love you as my dearest friend." "I don't know why," said Anna, kissing her and hiding her tears. "You understood me, and you understand. Goodbye, my darling." Chapter 29. "Come, it's all over, and thank God," was the first thought that came to Anna Arkadyevna when she had said goodbye for the last time to her brother, who had stood blocking up the entrance to the carriage till the third bell rang. She sat down on her lounge beside Annushka and looked about her in the twilight of the sleeping carriage. Thank God. Tomorrow I shall see Seryozha and Alexey Alexandrovitch, and my life will go on in the old way, all nice and as usual. Still in the same anxious frame of mind as she had been all that day, Anna took pleasure in arranging herself for the journey with great care. With her little deft hands, she opened and shut her little red bag, took out a cushion, laid it on her knees, and carefully wrapping up her feet, settled herself comfortably. An invalid lady had already lain down to sleep. Two other ladies began talking to Anna, and a stout elderly lady tucked up her feet and made observations about the heating of the train. Anna answered a few words, but not foreseeing any entertainment from the conversation, she asked Annushka to get a lamp, hooked it onto the arm of her seat, and took from her bag a paper knife and an English novel. At first her reading made no progress. The fuss and bustle were disturbing. Then, when the train had started, she could not help listening to the noises, then the snow beating on the left window and sticking to the pane, and the sight of the muffled guard passing by, covered with snow on one side, and the conversations about the terrible snowstorm raging outside, distracted her attention. Farther on, it was continually the same again and again, the same shaking and rattling, the same snow on the window, the same rapid transitions from steaming heat to cold and back again to heat, the same passing glimpses of the same figures in the twilight, and the same voices, and Anna began to read and to understand what she read. Anushka was already dozing, the red bag on her lap, clutched by her broad hands in gloves of which one was torn. Anna Arkadyevna read and understood, but it was distasteful to her to read, that is, to follow the reflection of other people's lives. She had too great a desire to live herself. If she read that the heroine of the novel was nursing a sick man, she longed to move with noiseless steps about the room of a sick man. If she read of a member of parliament making a speech, she longed to be delivering the speech. If she read of how Lady Mary had ridden after the hounds, and had provoked her sister-in-law, and had surprised everyone by her boldness, she too wished to be doing the same. But there was no chance of doing anything, and twisting the smooth paper knife in her little hands, she forced herself to read. The hero of the novel was already almost reaching his English happiness, a baronetcy and an estate, and Anna was feeling a desire to go with him to the estate, when she suddenly felt that he ought to feel ashamed, and that she was ashamed of the same thing. But what had he to be ashamed of? "What have I to be ashamed of?" she asked herself in injured surprise. She laid down the book and sank against the back of the chair, tightly gripping the paper cutter in both hands. There was nothing. She went over all her Moscow recollections. All were good, pleasant. She remembered the ball, remembered Vronsky and his face of slavish adoration, remembered all her conduct with him. There was nothing shameful. And for all that, at the same point in her memories, the feeling of shame was intensified, as though some inner voice, just at the point when she thought of Vronsky, was saying to her, "Warm, very warm, hot." "Well, what is it?" she said to herself resolutely, shifting her seat in the lounge. "What does it mean? Am I afraid to look it straight in the face? Why, what is it? Can it be that between me and this officer boy there exist, or can exist, any other relations than such as are common with every acquaintance?" She laughed contemptuously and took up her book again, but now she was definitely unable to follow what she read. She passed the paper knife over the window pane, then laid its smooth, cool surface to her cheek, and almost laughed aloud at the feeling of delight that all at once without cause came over her. She felt as though her nerves were strings being strained tighter and tighter on some sort of screwing peg. She felt her eyes opening wider and wider, her fingers and toes twitching nervously, something within oppressing her breathing, while all shapes and sounds seemed, in the uncertain half-light, to strike her with unaccustomed vividness. Moments of doubt were continually coming upon her, when she was uncertain whether the train were going forwards or backwards, or were standing still altogether, whether it were Anushka at her side or a stranger. What's that on the arm of the chair? A fur cloak? Or some beast? And what am I myself? Myself? Or some other woman? She was afraid of giving way to this delirium, but something drew her towards it, and she could yield to it or resist it at will. She got up to rouse herself and slipped off her plaid and the cape of her warm dress. For a moment she regained her self-possession and realized that the thin peasant who had come in wearing a long overcoat with buttons missing from it was the stove heater, that he was looking at the thermometer, that it was the wind and snow bursting in after him at the door. But then everything grew blurred again. That peasant with the long waist seemed to be gnawing something on the wall. The old lady began stretching her legs the whole length of the carriage and filling it with a black cloud. Then there was a fearful shrieking and banging, as though someone were being torn to pieces. Then there was a blinding dazzle of red fire before her eyes, and a wall seemed to rise up and hide everything. Anna felt as though she were sinking down, but it was not terrible, but delightful. The voice of a man, muffled up and covered with snow, shouted something in her ear. She got up and pulled herself together. She realized that they had reached a station and that this was the guard. She asked Anushka to hand her the cape she had taken off and her shawl, put them on, and moved towards the door. "Do you wish to get out?" asked Anushka. "Yes, I want a little air. It's very hot in here." And she opened the door. The driving snow and the wind rushed to meet her and struggled with her over the door. But she enjoyed the struggle. She opened the door and went out. The wind seemed as though lying in wait for her. With gleeful whistle, it tried to snatch her up and bear her off, but she clung to the cold doorpost and, holding her skirt, got down onto the platform and under the shelter of the carriages. The wind had been powerful on the steps, but on the platform, under the lee of the carriages, there was a lull. With enjoyment, she drew deep breaths of the frozen, snowy air, and standing near the carriage, looked about the platform and the lighted station. Chapter 30. The raging tempest rushed whistling between the wheels of the carriages, about the scaffolding, and round the corner of the station. The carriages, posts, people, everything that was to be seen, was covered with snow on one side, and was getting more and more thickly covered. For a moment, there would come a lull in the storm, but then it would swoop down again with such onslaughts that it seemed impossible to stand against it. Meanwhile, men ran to and fro, talking merrily together, their steps crackling on the platform as they continually opened and closed the big doors. The bent shadow of a man glided by at her feet, and she heard sounds of a hammer upon iron. "Hand over that telegram!" came an angry voice out of the stormy darkness on the other side. "This way, no! 28! Several different voices shouted again, and muffled figures ran by, covered with snow. Two gentlemen with lighted cigarettes passed by her. She drew one more deep breath of the fresh air, and had just put her hand out of her muff to take hold of the doorpost and get back into the carriage, when another man in a military overcoat quite close beside her stepped between her and the flickering light of the lamp-post. She looked round, and the same instant recognized Vronsky's face. Putting his hand to the peak of his cap, he bowed to her and asked, was there anything she wanted? Could he be of any service to her? She gazed rather a long while at him without answering, and, in spite of the shadow in which he was standing, she saw, or fancied she saw, both the expression of his face and his eyes. It was again that expression of reverential ecstasy which had so worked upon her the day before. More than once she had told herself during the past few days, and again only a few moments before, that Vronsky was for her only one of the hundreds of young men, forever exactly the same, that are met everywhere, that she would never allow herself to bestow a thought upon him. But now, at the first instant of meeting him, she was seized by a feeling of joyful pride. She had no need to ask why he had come. She knew as certainly as if he had told her that he was here to be where she was. "I didn't know you were going. What are you coming for?" she said, letting fall the hand with which she had grasped the doorpost. And irrepressible delight and eagerness shone in her face. "What am I coming for?" he repeated, looking straight into her eyes. "You know that I have come to be where you are," he said. "I can't help it." At that moment, the wind, as it were, surmounting all obstacles, sent the snow flying from the carriage roofs and clanked some sheet of iron it had torn off, while the hoarse whistle of the engine roared in front, plaintively and gloomily. All the awfulness of the storm seemed to her more splendid now. He had said what her soul longed to hear, though she feared it with her reason. She made no answer, and in her face he saw conflict. "Forgive me if you dislike what I said," he said humbly. He had spoken courteously, deferentially, yet so firmly, so stubbornly, that for a long while she could make no answer. "It's wrong, what you say, and I beg you, if you're a good man, to forget what you've said, as I forget it," she said at last. "Not one word, not one gesture of yours could I ever forget." "Enough, enough," she cried, trying assiduously to give a stern expression to her face, into which he was gazing greedily. And clutching at the cold doorpost, she clambered up the steps and got rapidly into the corridor of the carriage. But in the little corridor she paused, going over in her imagination what had happened. Though she could not recall her own words or his, she realized instinctively that the momentary conversation had brought them fearfully closer, and she was panic-stricken and blissful at it. After standing still a few seconds, she went into the carriage and sat down in her place. The overstrained condition which had tormented her before did not only come back, but was intensified, and reached such a pitch that she was afraid every minute that something would snap within her from the excessive tension. She did not sleep all night, but in that nervous tension and in the visions that filled her imagination, there was nothing disagreeable or gloomy. On the contrary, there was something blissful, glowing, and exhilarating. Towards morning, Anna sank into a doze, sitting in her place, and when she waked, it was daylight, and the train was near Petersburg. At once, thoughts of home, of husband, and of son, and the details of that day and the following came upon her. At Petersburg, as soon as the train stopped and she got out, the first person that attracted her attention was her husband. "Oh, mercy! Why do his ears look like that?" she thought, looking at his frigid and imposing figure, and especially the ears that struck her at the moment as propping up the brim of his round hat. Catching sight of her, he came to meet her, his lips falling into their habitual sarcastic smile, and his big, tired eyes looking straight at her. An unpleasant sensation gripped at her heart when she met his obstinate and weary glance, as though she had expected to see him different. She was especially struck by the feeling of dissatisfaction with herself that she experienced on meeting him. That feeling was an intimate, familiar feeling, like a consciousness of hypocrisy, which she experienced in her relations with her husband. But hitherto she had not taken note of the feeling. Now she was clearly and painfully aware of it. "Yes, as you see, your tender spouse, as devoted as the first year after marriage, burned with impatience to see you," he said in his deliberate, high-pitched voice, and in that tone which he almost always took with her, a tone of jeering at anyone who should say in earnest what he said. "Is Seryozha quite well?" she asked. "And is this all the reward?" said he. "For my ardor? He's quite well." Chapter 31. Vronsky had not even tried to sleep all that night. He sat in his armchair, looking straight before him, or scanning the people who got in and out. If he had indeed on previous occasions struck and impressed people who did not know him by his air of unhesitating composure, he seemed now more haughty and self-possessed than ever. He looked at people as if they were things. A nervous young man, a clerk in a law court sitting opposite him, hated him for that look. The young man asked him for a light and entered into conversation with him, and even pushed against him to make him feel that he was not a thing, but a person. But Vronsky gazed at him exactly as he did at the lamp, and the young man made a wry face, feeling that he was losing his self-possession under the oppression of this refusal to recognize him as a person. Vronsky saw nothing and no one. He felt himself a king, not because he believed that he had made an impression on Anna, he did not yet believe that, but because the impression she had made on him gave him happiness and pride. What would come of it all he did not know, he did not even think. He felt that all his forces, hitherto dissipated, wasted, were centered on one thing, and bent with fearful energy on one blissful goal. And he was happy at it. He knew only that he had told her the truth, that he had come where she was, that all the happiness of his life, the only meaning in life for him, now lay in seeing and hearing her. And when he got out of the carriage at Bologova to get some seltzer water and caught sight of Anna, involuntarily his first word had told her just what he thought. And he was glad he had told her it, that she knew it now and was thinking of it. He did not sleep all night. When he was back in the carriage, he kept unceasingly going over every position in which he had seen her, every word she had uttered, and before his fancy, making his heart faint with emotion, floated pictures of a possible future. When he got out of the train at Petersburg, he felt after his sleepless night as keen and fresh as after a cold bath. He paused near his compartment, waiting for her to get out. Once more, he said to himself, smiling unconsciously, once more I shall see her walk, her face. She will say something, turn her head, glance, smile, maybe. But before he caught sight of her, he saw her husband, whom the station master was deferentially escorting through the crowd. Ah, yes, the husband. Only now, for the first time, did Vronsky realize clearly the fact that there was a person attached to her, a husband. He knew that she had a husband, but had hardly believed in his existence, and only now fully believed in him, with his head and shoulders, and his legs clad in black trousers, especially when he saw this husband calmly take her arm with a sense of property. Seeing Alexei Alexandrovitch with his Petersburg face and severely self-confident figure, in his round hat with his rather prominent spine, he believed in him and was aware of a disagreeable sensation, such as a man might feel tortured by thirst, who, on reaching a spring, should find a dog, a sheep, or a pig, who has drunk of it and muddied the water. Alexei Alexandrovitch's manner of walking, with a swing of the hips and flat feet, particularly annoyed Vronsky. He could recognize in no one but himself an indubitable right to love her. But she was still the same, and the sight of her affected him the same way, physically reviving him, stirring him, and filling his soul with rapture. He told his German valet, who ran up to him from the second class, to take his things and go on, and he himself went up to her. He saw the first meeting between the husband and wife, and noted with a lover's insight the signs of slight reserve with which she spoke to her husband. No, she does not love him, and cannot love him, he decided to himself. At the moment when he was approaching Anna Arkadyevna, he noticed too with joy that she was conscious of his being near, and looked round, and seeing him, turned again to her husband. "Have you passed a good night?" he asked, bowing to her and her husband together, and leaving it up to Alexei Alexandrovitch to accept the bow on his own account, and to recognize it or not, as he might see fit. "Thank you. Very good," she answered. Her face looked weary, and there was not that play of eagerness in it, peeping out in her smile and her eyes. But for a single instant, as she glanced at him, there was a flash of something in her eyes, and although the flash died away at once, he was happy for that moment. She glanced at her husband to find out whether he knew Vronsky. Alexei Alexandrovitch looked at Vronsky with displeasure, vaguely recalling who this was. Vronsky's composure and self-confidence here struck like a scythe against a stone upon the cold self-confidence of Alexei Alexandrovitch. "Count Vronsky," said Anna. "Ah, we are acquainted, I believe," said Alexei Alexandrovitch indifferently, giving his hand. "You set off with the mother, and you return with the son," he said, articulating each syllable, as though each were a separate favor he was bestowing. "You're back from leave, I suppose," he said, and without waiting for a reply, he turned to his wife in his jesting tone. "Well, were a great many tears shed at Moscow at parting?" By addressing his wife like this, he gave Vronsky to understand that he wished to be left alone, and turning slightly towards him, he touched his hat. But Vronsky turned to Anna Arkadyevna. "I hope I may have the honor of calling on you," he said. Alexei Alexandrovitch glanced with his weary eyes at Vronsky. "Delighted," he said coldly. On Mondays we're at home. Most fortunate, he said to his wife, dismissing Vronsky altogether, that I should just have half an hour to meet you so that I can prove my devotion, he went on, in the same jesting tone. You lay too much stress on your devotion for me to value it much, she responded, in the same jesting tone, involuntarily listening to the sound of Vronsky's steps behind them. But what has it to do with me, she said to herself, and she began asking her husband how Seryozha had got on without her. Oh, capitally. Mariette says he has been very good, and I must disappoint you, but he has not missed you as your husband has. But once more merci, my dear, for giving me a day. Our dear Samovar will be delighted. He used to call the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, well known in society, a samovar because she was always bubbling over with excitement. She has been continually asking after you, and do you know, if I may venture to advise you, you should go and see her today. You know how she takes everything to heart. Just now, with all her own cares, she's anxious about the Oblonskys being brought together. The Countess Lydia Ivanovna was a friend of her husband's, and the center of that one of the coteries of the Petersburg world with which Anna was, through her husband, in the closest relations. But you know I wrote to her? Still, she'll want to hear details. Go and see her if you're not too tired, my dear. Well, Kondraty will take you in the carriage while I go to my committee. I shall not be alone at dinner again, Alexei Alexandrovitch went on, no longer in a sarcastic tone. You wouldn't believe how I've missed. And with a long pressure of her hand and a meaning smile, he put her in her carriage. Chapter 32. The first person to meet Anna at home was her son. He dashed down the stairs to her, in spite of the governess's call, and with desperate joy shrieked, "Mother! Mother!" Running up to her, he hung on her neck. "I told you it was Mother!" he shouted to the governess. "I knew!" And her son, like her husband, aroused in Anna a feeling akin to disappointment. She had imagined him better than he was in reality. She had to let herself drop down to the reality to enjoy him as he really was. But even as he was charming, with his fair curls, his blue eyes, and his plump, graceful little legs in tightly pulled-up stockings. Anna experienced almost physical pleasure in the sensation of his nearness and his caresses and moral soothing when she met his simple, confiding, and loving glance and heard his naive questions. Anna took out the presents Dolly's children had sent him and told her son what sort of little girl was Tanya at Moscow and how Tanya could read and even taught the other children. "Why, am I not so nice as she?" asked Seryozha. "To me, you're nicer than anyone in the world." "I know that," said Seryozha, smiling. Anna had not had time to drink her coffee when the Countess Lydia Ivanovna was announced. The Countess Lydia Ivanovna was a tall, stout woman with an unhealthily sallow face and splendid, pensive black eyes. Anna liked her, but today she seemed to be seeing her for the first time with all her defects. "Well, my dear, so you took the olive branch?" inquired Countess Lydia Ivanovna as soon as she came into the room. "Yes, it's all over, but it was all much less serious than we had supposed," answered Anna. "My belle-sœur is in general too hasty." But Countess Lydia Ivanovna, though she was interested in everything that did not concern her, had a habit of never listening to what interested her. She interrupted Anna. "Yes, there's plenty of sorrow and evil in the world. I'm so worried today." "Oh, why?" asked Anna, trying to suppress a smile. "I'm beginning to be weary of fruitlessly championing the truth, and sometimes I'm quite unhinged by it. The Society of the Little Sisters," this was a religiously patriotic, philanthropic institution, "was going splendidly, but with these gentlemen it's impossible to do anything," added Countess Lydia Ivanovna in a tone of ironical submission to destiny. "They pounce on the idea and distort it, and then work it out so pettily and unworthily. 2 or 3 people, your husband among them, understand all the importance of the thing, but the others simply drag it down. Yesterday, Pravdin wrote to me. Pravdin was a well-known panslavist abroad, and Countess Lydia Ivanovna described the purport of his letter. Then the Countess told her of more disagreements and intrigues against the work of the unification of the churches, and departed in haste, as she had that day to be at the meeting of some society and also at the Slavonic Committee. It was all the same before, of course, but why was it I didn't notice it before? Anna asked herself. Or has she been very much irritated today? It's really ludicrous. Her object is doing good, she a Christian, yet she's always angry, and she always has enemies, and always enemies in the name of Christianity and doing good. After Countess Lydia Ivanovna, another friend came, the wife of a chief secretary, who told her all the news of the town. At 3 o'clock, she too went away, promising to come to dinner. Alexei Alexandrovitch was at the ministry. Anna, left alone, spent the time till dinner in assisting at her son's dinner. He dined apart from his parents, and in putting her things in order, and in reading and answering the notes and letters which had accumulated on her table. The feeling of causeless shame, which she had felt on the journey, and her excitement too, had completely vanished. In the habitual conditions of her life, she felt again resolute and irreproachable. She recalled with wonder her state of mind on the previous day. What was it? Nothing. Vronsky said something silly, which it was easy to put a stop to, and I answered as I ought to have done. To speak of it to my husband would be unnecessary and out of the question. To speak of it would be to attach importance to what has no importance. She remembered how she had told her husband of what was almost a declaration made her at Petersburg by a young man, one of her husband's subordinates, and how Alexei Alexandrovitch had answered that every woman living in the world was exposed to such incidents, but that he had the fullest confidence in her tact and could never lower her and himself by jealousy. So then there's no reason to speak of it? And indeed, thank God, there's nothing to speak of, she told herself. Chapter 33. Alexei Alexandrovitch came back from the meeting of the ministers at 4 o'clock, but as often happened, he had not time to come in to her. He went into his study to see the people waiting for him with petitions, and to sign some papers brought him by his chief secretary. At dinner time, there were always a few people dining with the Karenins, there arrived an old lady, a cousin of Alexei Alexandrovitch, the chief secretary of the department and his wife, and a young man who had been recommended to Alexei Alexandrovitch for the service. Anna went into the drawing-room to receive these guests, precisely at 5 o'clock, before the bronze Peter I clock had struck the 5th stroke. Alexei Alexandrovitch came in, wearing a white tie and evening coat with 2 stars, as he had to go out directly after dinner. Every minute of Alexei Alexandrovitch's life was portioned out and occupied, and to make time to get through all that lay before him every day, he adhered to the strictest punctuality. Unhasting and unresting was his motto. He came into the dining hall, greeted everyone, and hurriedly sat down, smiling to his wife. Yes, my solitude is over. You wouldn't believe how uncomfortable, he laid stress on the word uncomfortable, it is to dine alone. At dinner, he talked a little to his wife about Moscow matters, and with a sarcastic smile asked her after Stepan Arkadyevitch. But the conversation was for the most part general, dealing with Petersburg official and public news. After dinner, he spent half an hour with his guests, and again, with a smile, pressed his wife's hand, withdrew, and drove off to the council. Anna did not go out that evening either, to the Princess Betsy Tverskaya, who, hearing of her return, had invited her, nor to the theatre, where she had a box for that evening. She did not go out principally because the dress she had reckoned upon was not ready. Altogether, Anna, on turning, after the departure of her guests, to the consideration of her attire, was very much annoyed. She was generally a mistress of the art of dressing well without great expense, and before leaving Moscow, she had given her dressmaker 3 dresses to transform. The dresses had to be altered so that they could not be recognized, and they ought to have been ready 3 days before. It appeared that 2 dresses had not been done at all, while the other one had not been altered as Anna had intended. The dressmaker came to explain, declaring that it would be better as she had done it, and Anna was so furious that she felt ashamed when she thought of it afterwards. To regain her serenity completely, she went into the nursery and spent the whole evening with her son, put him to bed herself, signed him with the cross, and tucked him up. She was glad she had not gone out anywhere and had spent the evening so well. She felt so light-hearted and serene. She saw so clearly that all that had seemed to her so important on her railway journey was only one of the common, trivial incidents of fashionable life, and that she had no reason to feel ashamed before anyone else or before herself. Anna sat down at the hearth with an English novel and waited for her husband. Exactly at 9:30, she heard his ring, and he came into the room. "Here you are at last," she observed, holding out her hand to him. He kissed her hand and sat down beside her. "Altogether, then, I see your visit was a success," he said to her. "Oh, yes," she said, and she began telling him about everything from the beginning: her journey with Countess Vronskaya, her arrival, the accident at the station. Then she described the pity she had felt, first for her brother, and afterwards for Dolly. "I imagine one cannot exonerate such a man from blame, though he is your brother," said Alexey Alexandrovitch severely. Anna smiled. She knew that he said that simply to show that family considerations could not prevent him from expressing his genuine opinion. She knew that characteristic in her husband and liked it. "I'm glad it has all ended so satisfactorily and that you are back again," he went on. "Come, what do they say about the new act I've got passed in the council?" Anna had heard nothing of this act, and she felt conscience-stricken at having been able so readily to forget what was to him of such importance. "Here, on the other hand, it has made a great sensation," he said with a complacent smile. She saw that Alexey Alexandrovitch wanted to tell her something pleasant to him about it, and she brought him by questions to telling it. With the same complacent smile, he told her of the ovations he had received in consequence of the act he had passed. "I was very, very glad. It shows that at last a reasonable and steady view of the matter is becoming prevalent among us." Having drunk his second cup of tea with cream and bread, Alexey Alexandrovitch got up and was going towards his study. "And you've not been anywhere this evening? You've been dull, I expect," he said. "Oh, no," she answered, getting up after him and accompanying him across the room to his study. "What are you reading now?" she asked. "Just now I'm reading Duc de Lille, Poésie d'Enfer," he answered. "A very remarkable book." Anna smiled, as people smile at the weaknesses of those they love, and putting her hand under his, she escorted him to the door of the study. She knew his habit, that had grown into a necessity, of reading in the evening. She knew, too, that in spite of his official duties, which swallowed up almost the whole of his time, he considered it his duty to keep up with everything of note that appeared in the intellectual world. She knew, too, that he was really interested in books dealing with politics, philosophy, and theology, that art was utterly foreign to his nature. But in spite of this, or rather, in consequence of it, Alexey Alexandrovitch never passed over anything in the world of art, but made it his duty to read everything. She knew that in politics, in philosophy, in theology, Alexey Alexandrovitch often had doubts and made investigations. But on questions of art and poetry, and above all of music, of which he was totally devoid of understanding, he had the most distinct and decided opinions. He was fond of talking about Shakespeare, Raphael, Beethoven, of the significance of new schools of poetry and music, all of which were classified by him with very conspicuous consistency. Well, God be with you, she said at the door of the study, where a shaded candle and a decanter of water were already put by his armchair. And I'll write to Moscow. He pressed her hand and again kissed it. All the same, he's a good man, truthful, good-hearted, and remarkable in his own line, Anna said to herself, going back to her room, as though she were defending him to someone who had attacked him and said that one could not love him. But why is it his ears stick out so strangely? Or has he had his hair cut? Precisely at 12 o'clock, when Anna was still sitting at her writing table, finishing a letter to Dolly, she heard the sound of measured steps in slippers, and Alexey Alexandrovitch, freshly washed and combed, with a book under his arm, came in to her. It's time, said he, with a meaning smile, and he went into their bedroom. And what right had he to look at him like that, thought Anna, recalling Vronsky's glance at Alexey Alexandrovitch. Undressing, she went into the bedroom, but her face had none of the eagerness which, during her stay in Moscow, had fairly flashed from her eyes and her smile. On the contrary, now the fire seemed quenched in her, hidden somewhere far away. Chapter 34. When Vronsky went to Moscow from Petersburg, he had left his large set of rooms in Morskaya to his friend and favorite comrade, Petritsky. Petritsky was a young lieutenant, not particularly well connected, and not merely not wealthy, but always hopelessly in debt. Towards evening he was always drunk, and he had often been locked up after all sorts of ludicrous and disgraceful scandals, but he was a favorite both of his comrades and his superior officers. On arriving at 12 o'clock from the station at his flat, Vronsky saw at the outer door a hired carriage familiar to him. While still outside his own door as he rang, he heard masculine laughter, the lisp of a feminine voice, and Petritsky's voice. "If that's one of the villains, don't let him in," Vronsky told the servant not to announce him, and slipped quietly into the first room. Baroness Shilton, a friend of Petritsky's, with a rosy little face and flaxen hair, resplendent in a lilac satin gown, and filling the whole room like a canary with her Parisian chatter, sat at the round table making coffee. Petritsky, in his overcoat, and the cavalry captain Kamerovsky, in full uniform, probably just come from duty, were sitting each side of her. "Bravo! Vronsky!" shouted Petritsky, jumping up, scraping his chair. "Our host himself, Baroness, some coffee for him out of the new coffee pot. Why, we didn't expect you. Hope you're satisfied with the ornament of your study," he said, indicating the Baroness. "You know each other, of course?" "I should think so," said Vronsky with a bright smile, pressing the Baroness's little hand. "What next? I'm an old friend." "You're home after a journey," said the Baroness, "so I'm flying. Oh, I'll be off this minute if I'm in the way." "You're home wherever you are, Baroness," said Vronsky. "How do you do, Kamerovsky?" he added, coldly shaking hands with Kamerovsky. "There, you never know how to say such pretty things," said the Baroness, turning to Petritsky. "No, what's that for? After dinner, I say things quite as good." "After dinner there's no credit in them? Well then, I'll make you some coffee, so go and wash and get ready," said the Baroness, sitting down again and anxiously turning the screw in the new coffee pot. "Pierre, give me the coffee," she said, addressing Petritsky, whom she called Pierre as a contraction of his surname, making no secret of her relations with him. "I'll put it in." "You'll spoil it." "No, I won't spoil it." "Well, and your wife?" said the Baroness suddenly, interrupting Vronsky's conversation with his comrade. "We've been marrying you here. Have you brought your wife?" "No, Baroness. I was born a Bohemian, and a Bohemian I shall die." "So much the better, so much the better. Shake hands on it." And the Baroness, detaining Vronsky, began telling him, with many jokes, about her last new plans of life, asking his advice. "He persists in refusing to give me a divorce. Well, what am I to do?" He was her husband. "Now I want to begin a suit against him. What do you advise? Kamarowski, look after the coffee. It's boiling over. You see, I'm engrossed with business. I want a lawsuit because I must have my property. Do you understand the folly of it, that on the pretext of my being unfaithful to him, she said contemptuously, he wants to get the benefit of my fortune? Vronsky heard with pleasure this light-hearted prattle of a pretty woman, agreed with her, gave her half-joking counsel, and altogether dropped at once into the tone habitual to him in talking to such women. In his Petersburg world, all people were divided into utterly opposed classes. One, the lower class, vulgar, stupid, and above all, ridiculous people who believe that one husband ought to live with the one wife whom he has lawfully married, that a girl should be innocent, a woman modest, and a man manly, self-controlled, and strong, that one ought to bring up one's children, earn one's bread, and pay one's debts, and various similar absurdities. This was the class of old-fashioned and ridiculous people. But there was another class of people, the real people. To this class they all belonged, and in it the great thing was to be elegant, generous, plucky, gay, to abandon oneself without a blush to every passion, and to laugh at everything else. For the first moment only, Vronsky was startled after the impression of a quite different world that he had brought with him from Moscow. But immediately, as though slipping his feet into old slippers, he dropped back into the light-hearted, pleasant world he had always lived in. The coffee was never really made, but spluttered over everyone and boiled away, doing just what was required of it. That is, providing much cause for much noise and laughter, and spoiling a costly rug and the Baroness's gown. Well, now, goodbye, or you'll never get washed, and I shall have on my conscience the worst sin a gentleman can commit. So you would advise a knife to his throat? To be sure, and manage that your hand may not be far from his lips. He'll kiss your hand, and all will end satisfactorily, answered Vronsky. So at the Francais, and, with a rustle of her skirts, she vanished. Kamarowski got up too, and Vronsky, not waiting for him to go, shook hands and went off to his dressing-room. While he was washing, Petritsky described to him in brief outlines his position, as far as it had changed since Vronsky had left Petersburg. No money at all. His father said he wouldn't give him any and pay his debts. His tailor was trying to get him locked up, and another fellow, too, was threatening to get him locked up. The colonel of the regiment had announced that if these scandals did not cease, he would have to leave. As for the Baroness, he was sick to death of her, especially since she'd taken to offering continually to lend him money. But he had found a girl, he'd show her to Vronsky, a marvel, exquisite in the strict Oriental style, genre of the slave Rebecca, don't you know? He'd had a row, too, with Berkashov, and was going to send seconds to him, but of course it would come to nothing. Altogether, everything was supremely amusing and jolly, and not letting his comrade enter into further details of his position, Petritsky proceeded to tell him all the interesting news. As he listened to Petritsky's familiar stories in the familiar setting of the rooms he had spent the last 3 years in, Vronsky felt a delightful sense of coming back to the careless Petersburg life that he was used to. "Impossible!" he cried, letting down the pedal of the washing basin in which he had been sousing his healthy red neck. "Impossible!" he cried, at the news that Laura had flung over Fertinghoff and had made up to Milev. "And is he as stupid and pleased as ever? Well, and how's Buzulikov?" "Oh, there is a tale about Buzulikov, simply lovely," cried Petritsky. "You know his weakness for balls, and he never misses a single court ball. He went to a big ball in a new helmet. Have you seen the new helmets? Very nice, lighter. Well, so he's standing— No, I say, do listen." "I am listening," answered Vronsky, rubbing himself with a rough towel. "Up comes the Grand Duchess with some ambassador or other, and, as ill luck would have it, she begins talking to him about the new helmets. The Grand Duchess positively wanted to show the new helmet to the ambassador. They see our friend standing there. Petritsky mimicked how he was standing with the helmet. The Grand Duchess asked him to give her the helmet. He doesn't give it to her. What do you think of that? Well, everyone's winking at him, nodding, frowning. Give it to her, do. He doesn't give it to her. He's mute as a fish. Only picture it. Well, what's his name? Whatever he was. Tries to take the helmet from him. He won't give it up. He pulls it from him and hands it to the Grand Duchess. Here, Your Highness, says he, is the new helmet. She turned the helmet the other side up and, just picture it, plop went a pear and sweetmeats out of it. 2 pounds of sweetmeats. He'd been storing them up, the darling. Vronsky burst into roars of laughter, and long afterwards, when he was talking of other things, he broke out into his healthy laugh, showing his strong, close rows of teeth when he thought of the helmet. Having heard all the news, Vronsky, with the assistance of his valet, got into his uniform and went off to report himself. He intended, when he had done that, to drive to his brother's and to Betsy's, and to pay several visits, with a view to beginning to go into that society where he might meet Madame Karenina. As he always did in Petersburg, he left home not meaning to return till late at night.